She wasn't meant to be seen that night. Just a blonde nanny in a cheap black dress, leaning against the marble pillar while laughter spilled like champagne around her. But when the billionaire's gaze found her across the ballroom, everything stopped just for a moment, just long enough for the music to change everything. The mansion rose above the dark hills like a golden crown, windows glowing under a bruised purple sky. 100 cars lined the circular drive, engines cooling while the ocean's hush carried into the courtyard, swallowing the chatter of guests as they stepped into the warmth of wealth. Inside, crystal chandeliers rained light over the grand hall, where women in gowns that cost more than her year's rent twirled and laughed, and men in sleek suits checked their watches while scanning the room for people worth knowing. And in the corner, near the edge of a silk-draped table heavy with imported cheeses, she stood alone. Her hair was pinned into a loose bun that had begun to fall, a few strands catching the light as she tucked them behind her ear. Her shoes pinched. She borrowed the black dress from her boss's daughter, told she could attend the party, just for a moment while the baby slept upstairs. A nanny, invisible among the powerful. She should have stayed in the nursery, but the music was too sweet, the violins too soft, the hush of the world she carried on her shoulders too heavy to hold in that gilded silence. So she stepped forward just once, just to feel the song. Among swirling dresses and polite laughter, she moved like a ghost, unnoticed, as if she were dancing in a dream she wasn't allowed to keep. She let her eyes close for a breath, letting the strings pull her gently across the polished floor. Arms loose, steps careful, pretending that the music belonged to her. For a moment, she almost forgot. She almost forgot the bus rides, the cold mornings, the small apartment where the pipes rattled in winter. She almost forgot the feeling of being tired before the day even began, the emptiness of her phone, the echoing rooms when she returned home alone. For a moment, the music was a promise, but the laughter returned, brushing against her like cold water, reminding her that she was just a shadow among stars. She opened her eyes and found herself alone again, standing at the edge of the dance floor, the music carrying on without her. And that's when she saw him, across the room, standing near the balcony doors that framed the silver spill of moonlight. Was the billionaire. Everyone in the city knew his name, whispered in offices and coffee shops, printed beneath sharp photos in glossy magazines. He was power wrapped in quiet, a man whose presence pulled conversations toward him like gravity. His hair was dark, suit immaculate, but it was his eyes cold, watching, calculating that made people pause when they spoke to him. And those eyes were on her. For a moment, she felt foolish, felt the heat rise to her cheeks as she turned away, wishing she could melt into the marble, wishing she had stayed upstairs with the sleeping baby instead of letting the music betray her. Loneliness. But his gaze didn't leave her. She could feel it, like a thread pulling her back toward the dance floor, urging her to lift her head, to see that she had been seen. The violinist pulled the bow across the strings, the music swelling, filling the gilded room with something that felt like a rising tide, something that felt like hope if she dared to let it in. And as she stood there, breathing, alone in the crowd, the billionaire stepped forward. One step, then another. The room didn't notice. The laughter carried on, the clinking glasses, the polite applause for the violinist's crescendo. But her world narrowed, the edges of the ballroom fading as he crossed the space between them. Her hands trembled, but she didn't move. Not yet. She waited. And the moment hung there, a fragile promise in the golden light, just before the world would change forever. The billionaire's shoes were silent on the marble as he crossed the ballroom, the hush around him almost supernatural, like the air bent to clear his path. He moved with the calm certainty of someone who owned every room he entered, a man whose world was built on closed doors opening without a knock. And she was frozen, her breath shallow, her borrowed black dress too tight at the ribs, her mind racing, with the impossibility of him seeing her at all. But he saw her. He stopped in front of her, just a breath away, while the chandeliers above them flickered softly, and the violinist lowered the bow for a brief, aching pause before the music began. Again, the world didn't notice the moment hanging between them, but she felt it, the fragile, sharp edge of something about to change. His hand extended. Nothing grand, nothing showy, just a hand, palm open, waiting, and she stared at the hand, at the man, at the impossible request wrapped in a single gesture, asking her to step out of the shadow she had lived in for so long. She could see his cufflinks glinting, the watch on his wrist worth more than she would ever touch, the veins in his hand beneath skin that knew no calluses. She could see herself reflected in the dark of his eyes. The nanny, the girl who was not meant to be here. But the music began again, a soft piano under a violin's weep, and the billionaire didn't look away. The world around them blurred, the clinking glasses, the hushed gossip, the swell of perfume and cigar smoke. The world waited, and then, with a breath she didn't know she was holding, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. It was small in his grasp, trembling, but he held it as if it was the most natural thing in the world, as if the universe had always planned for this moment and was only now exhaling in relief. And he led her onto the dance floor. The music was slow, the kind of song that made the chandeliers sway in reflection, the kind that let the city lights outside the windows blur into rivers of gold and blue. He placed one hand lightly on her waist, and she felt the heat of it through the cheap fabric of her dress. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something clean, cold, expensive. She didn't know how to dance. Not in the way these people did, with practice steps and polite spins, smiling for photographs and networking with each turn. She only knew the dances she made up alone in her kitchen when the world felt too heavy, swaying in the darkness to songs that let her forget the hours she'd traded for rent, the calls she never made to her mother, the dreams she packed away to pay bills. But he moved slowly, guiding her, letting the music teach her feet what to do. She followed him, her eyes on his collarbone, because she couldn't bear to look into his eyes. Not when everything in her felt like it would crumble if she did. And around them, the world began to notice. Heads turned, conversations paused. A hush, like a ripple in still water, passed through the room as the billionaire danced with the blonde nanny in the black dress. That didn't fit quite right, and she felt them watching, the eyes, the whispers. But for the first time, she didn't care, because the music was theirs now. The dance floor was theirs now. The lights above them glowed softer, the violin crying for a world they both understood in different ways. A world that had taken too much from them, a world that had demanded too much silence. Her feet stumbled once, but his hand tightened, steadying her, and he gave the smallest nod, a wordless reassurance that she didn't have to be perfect here. And so she let go. She let herself move, let herself feel the music, let herself breathe in the moment as if it was a warm wind after a long winter. She let herself believe, for the length of that song, that she could belong somewhere beautiful, even if it was only for a single dance. The chandelier caught the reflection of her hair as it fell from its pins, framing her face in gold. And she closed her eyes, letting the music and the moment hold her, letting herself be seen, letting herself be alive. And when the song ended, the billionaire didn't let go of her hand. The music faded, but he didn't let go. She felt the world watching, the glittering crowd pretending to look away while their eyes stayed fixed on her. And the billionaire whose name they all whispered with caution. She felt their curiosity press against her skin, but his hand around hers was steady, quiet, sure. And without a word, he led her off the dance floor. They moved through the crowd like a single breath, past the crystal glasses, past the careful smiles, past the perfume that clung to every corner of the mansion. The heavy doors to the balcony stood open, letting the summer night drift in, carrying the scent of salt and roses from the gardens below. They stepped outside. The air was cooler there, the sky a deep endless blue with stars scattered like distant hopes. The ocean's hush rose to meet them, waves crashing far below the cliff where the mansion stood, a lullaby older than every name etched in marble inside. She felt the tension in her shoulders, felt the questions that wanted to spill from her lips, felt the weight of the night pressing against the fragile moment they had carved out of the world. But he didn't speak. Neither did she. They stood there, the cool breeze brushing against her bare shoulders, carrying the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his presence at her side. The world was quiet in that breath between them, the music inside muffled by the heavy curtains, the laughter now a distant hum. Below them, the lights of the city blinked, each one a story, each one a person carrying their small hope through the darkness. She wondered if her apartment's window was visible from here, if her life, small and quiet and unseen, was flickering somewhere below. She wondered if this was real, because nothing in her life had prepared her for the stillness of standing beside a man like him, a man whose name could bend the city's will, a man whose silence felt louder than every conversation she'd ever had. She glanced at him, the way he stood, hands now resting on the balcony rail, shoulders strong, eyes lost somewhere on the horizon, told her he was not the man the world gossiped about. Or maybe he was, but there was more, something softer, something wounded, something tired. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his eyes softened when he looked at the sky instead of the world that demanded his attention. She didn't know what to say, so she stepped forward, letting the cool breeze carry her hair around her face, letting the quiet hold them both, letting herself exist in this moment without needing to fill it with words. Because she had spent her life being small, being careful, being silent to keep the world calm around her, and for once, she didn't want to be small, not beside him. She let herself lean on the railing, her bare arm brushing against the sleeve of his suit, close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to feel alive. Her heart beat hard in her chest, not out of fear, but out of something else. Something that felt like possibility, and in the silence, she felt the night open around them, the waves below steady and relentless, the stars above patient and eternal. She didn't know how long they stood there, long enough for the party inside to become a distant memory, long enough for her breathing to steady, long enough for the questions to fall away, leaving only the simple truth that she was here, with him, and that for this one moment. The world had made space for her to feel seen. He turned to her, finally, the moonlight catching the edge of his jaw, the softness in his eyes surprising her. And for a heartbeat, the billionaire and the blonde nanny were just a man and a woman standing on a balcony, wrapped in the hush of the night, letting the world fall away, and then he lifted his hand again, not to take hers this time, but to brush a strand of hair from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear, letting his fingers linger just long enough for her to close her eyes, too. Let herself believe that this moment was not borrowed, but hers. And the world held its breath. His fingers left her skin, but the warmth stayed, lingering in the place where he had tucked her hair behind her ear, lingering in the air between them like a promise neither of them dared to speak. She opened her eyes. The moon was higher now, spilling silver light across the balcony, painting him in quiet shadows, softening the edges the world had carved into him. In that light, he didn't look like the billionaire from the magazines, the man with cold eyes and a colder reputation. He looked tired, tired in the way people who carry too much become, tired in the way she knew in her own bones each morning, when she woke before dawn to catch the first bus. Tired in the way the world demands silence from those who have no one to speak for them. They stood there, the hush around them fragile. And then, without a word, he moved. It was subtle, just a shift of his weight, a slow raising of his hand, palm open, waiting for hers. It was not the grand gesture from the ballroom, not the moment of spectacle that turned heads and stopped conversations. This was something quieter, something real. She looked at his hand, at the way it waited, steady and sure. and she felt the weight of the world pressing against her back, reminding her that she was just the nanny, just the girl in the borrowed dress, just another ghost in a world that did not see her. But she reached out anyway. Their hands met, fingers interlacing, and he pulled her closer, so close she could feel the warmth of him, so close she could see the small lines around his eyes, the kind that came not from smiling, but from trying not to. And there, on the balcony above the crashing waves, they began to dance. There was no music, only the distant echo of laughter from inside, the sigh of the ocean, the whisper of the breeze. But it was enough. She let him guide her. Let the rhythm of the waves set the pace. Let the quiet night become their song. They moved slowly, each step careful, the marble beneath their feet cold, the moonlight following them as they turned, as if even the stars above had chosen to witness this small, impossible moment. She let her head rest against his chest, felt the steady beat of his heart, felt the rise and fall of his breathing, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Safe in a world that had never felt safe. Safe in the arms of a man she should not have known, should not have trusted, should not have let herself believe in. But she did, because in that dance, in the silence that wrapped around them like a soft blanket, there was no billionaire, no nanny, no lines drawn by money or status or fear. There was just him and her, and the quiet promise that for this moment, they could be something more. She closed her eyes. She let herself feel it, let herself believe it, let herself be seen and held and understood, if only for the length of this quiet, stolen dance under the moon. And as they turned slowly, her bare feet brushing against the marble, her hair falling loose around her face, she felt something shift inside her, something small but powerful, a hope she thought she had lost. And when she finally lifted her head to look at him, he was already looking at her, his eyes soft, his expression unreadable, but his hand around hers firm and warm, anchoring her in the moment. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because in that quiet, in that dance no one saw, they were rewriting the stories they had been forced to live, even if it was only for a moment. Even if the world would come crashing back too soon, for now, they were free. They stopped moving, but they did not let go. The waves below kept their steady rhythm. The hush and crash like the breathing of something eternal. Something that did not care about titles or paychecks or borrowed dresses. The moon stood above them, patient, casting its quiet approval over the dance that had ended but left them changed. She felt the silence between them, heavy and warm, the way silence could be when two people had said everything without words. And then the world returned. It came as a whisper. First voices from the balcony doors, laughter drifting, the clink of a glass. Then it was footsteps, the cautious, careful steps of people who did not want to interrupt but needed to see. It was the hush that fell behind them. The eyes she felt pressing into her back, the judgment, the curiosity, the envy. She pulled her hand back, almost out of instinct, but he held it, firm, anchoring her to the moment they had made for themselves. She looked at him, and for the first time, she let herself truly see him, the billionaire, the man whose name opened doors, whose choices changed lives, whose power was spoken of in cautious tones. But in that moment, he was just a man who didn't want to let go. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the weight of what waited for him inside those rooms, the people who would need things from him, who would demand and take and leave him hollow. Again, she saw the way he glanced toward the doors, the flicker of the world pulling at him. And she knew what came next, because the world they lived in did not allow moments like this to last. It did not allow dances on balconies under the moonlight between a nanny in a borrowed dress and a man whose wealth could fill oceans. It did not allow a small, quiet hope to survive under the eyes of those who believed they owned the rules. But she didn't let go either. For one breath longer, she held on, feeling the warmth of his hand, letting herself keep the memory of it, letting herself believe that this moment had been real, that she had been seen, that she had been chosen, even if only for a single dance. And then, slowly, she pulled her hand away, not because she wanted to, but because she had to, because the world was waiting, and the baby upstairs would wake, and the buses would still run in the morning, and the borrowed dress would need to be returned, and the dishes would need washing, and life would demand her silence once more. She stepped back, letting the cool night air fill the space between them, letting herself breathe, letting herself remember. His eyes followed her, soft, quiet, the way the ocean followed the moon. And in that look, she saw something she would keep with her, something she would carry into the small, quiet mornings that waited for her, a promise that she had been seen, that she had mattered, that for one dance, one breath, she had been alive in a way she had never allowed herself to be before. She turned toward the doors, toward the warm light spilling onto the balcony, toward the laughter and the music and the world that would forget her the moment she stepped back inside Dot. And as she walked away, she felt the tears press against her eyes, not from sadness, but from the fierce, quiet gratitude for a moment that had given her something no one could take away. She stepped through the doors, the warmth of the party wrapped around her, the music pulling her back into the hum of a world that would not pause for her story. She became invisible again, slipping between conversations, unnoticed, unseen. But inside, she was still dancing. Inside, she still felt the warmth of his hand, the way the moonlight had made her hair glow, the way the ocean's hush had become their music. Inside, she was still alive. The party moved on without her. The music rose again, laughter folding into the scent of roses and wine, crystal glasses refilled, conversations layered over conversations until the hush of her dance on the balcony was nothing but a ripple in a sea of noise. She moved through the room, invisible, as she had always been. She found the staircase and climbed it quietly, the gold railing cold under her fingertips. The hallway was lined with paintings of people who had lived and died long before this night, people who would never know the small, quiet moments she had stolen for herself under the moonlight. She slipped into the nursery, the soft glow of the nightlight painting the room in pale blue. The baby stirred in the crib, small hands curling, a quiet sigh in the hush of the room. She bent over, brushing a gentle hand over the baby's forehead, letting the warmth of the child's breathing remind her of what was real, of what mattered, of what she returned to, even when the world offered her a single, impossible moment under the stars. She sat in the rocking chair, the creak of wood soft, steady, comforting. And she let herself remember the dance, the way his hand had felt around hers, the hush of the waves below, the moonlight catching the gold in her hair, the way he had looked at her, not as a billionaire, not as a man who owned the world, but as a man who saw her, the way she had let herself be seen. She held that memory close, folding it into the quiet places inside her, letting it live there, untouched, a small flame against the cold that the world so often brought. It was hers, and it would remain hers, no matter what came tomorrow. Because tomorrow, the world would return, the early bus would arrive, and the hours would be long, and the paycheck would be small, and the silence would return, and she would once again dance alone in the kitchen when the world felt too heavy. But she would not be the same, because for one moment, the world had opened, and she had stepped into it, and she had danced, and she had been seen. And that was enough. She looked out the window, seeing the moon hanging above the city, seeing the lights blinking in the distance, each one a person living their small, quiet life, each one carrying their own stories that the world would never know. And somewhere, she knew, he was standing at the balcony, looking at the same moon, remembering the same dance. And though the world would pull him back, demand his silence, demand his power, demand his choices, she knew that he would remember. Because in that dance, They had been free dot, and sometimes she would close her eyes, and she would feel it again. The warmth of his hand, the hush of the waves, the moonlight in her hair, the way the world had held its breath just for them. And she would smile, quietly, to herself. Because even if she would dance alone again, even if the world would forget her, even if the moment was gone, she had lived it. And that was enough.